What role does faith play in the public square? Is secular positions like government those that should exclude expressions of faith? Recently, a Supreme Court decision said that a football coach who was praying at midfield after games couldn't be fired or punished for those actions. Is that right? How do we understand faith and its role with religion, and what do we do about the concept of the separation of church and faith? We're going to explore all of these issues and more on Come Let Us Reason. Well, good morning, everyone. This is Lenny Esposito coming to you for Come Let Us Reason. We are an outreach of Come Reason Ministries. Been podcasting since 2006, though usually not in this format. We're going in a new direction a little bit right now, doing a conversational piece where I'm joined again, as I was last week, with my two friends, Raymond Gregory and Dominic Aguiar. Raymond, why don't you just introduce yourself real quick to folks who are joining us for the first time. Let us know, how you've been and what you do.
So my name is Raymond, as Lenny said. We've known each other, 20 plus years at least.
Something like that, yeah.
Ministry's been instrumental in my faith and my faith journey, and particularly reasoning into faith, which is great. Been a musician pretty much my whole life. Have records out, toured a little bit, traveled quite a bit, worked at a church called Harvest, which is where we started working together, ministering together for about 10 years. And then left that to pursue more of a pastoral role. I still lead worship, but I'm also a teaching pastor at Calvary Chapel, East Anaheim.
And you're embarked on a master's degree program.
I am embarked on a master's degree, yeah. I'm about a year out from...
Okay.
Well, if everything goes well.
And, have you decided...
I spend less time doing podcasts.
Oh, see, so it's all, yeah. I'm pulling you away from the books, but hopefully you can take what you've learned.
Yes.
Now, what have you decided on what you're going to write on?
So right now I'm in a worldview class.
Okay.
And so I have to do a major project. I'm going to do an essay on social justice in the church.
Okay.
So, light reading, light topic.
Yeah, critical justice issues are obviously the focus today, but there's a lot out there, and on both sides of that spectrum. Also, Dominic Aguiar and I have known each other at least as long as Raymond, and Dom has been formidable in helping Come Reason since its inception, one of the founding board members in 1999. Believe it or not. So, how you doing, Dom? Doing good?
Doing good. Yeah, thanks for having me. Again, my name is Dominic Aguiar. I'm married, have a couple of 3 kids, a dog. Nothing dramatic about my life. I'm kind of a normal guy. What I do for a living, I clean water with an awesome team of people. Pretty much just clean water, make it drinkable.
But don't you use water to clean everything else?
Yes, you do. Which is why it's probably an important job, right?
Yeah.
Anyhow,
you clean water, so is that like a industrial or like household stuff?
No. So I basically make potable drinking water. Or potable water.
Works for a water district.
Oh,
that supplies water to.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I'm an operations supervisor for a water treatment facility. We have the ability to produce 25 million gallons a day of drinking water.
So is there really a drought right now?
Yeah, don't get me on that right now because I'll get all fired up.
We're in California. For anyone else is
a lot of that, a portion of that, I'll say, a factor of that is managed.
So the whole living water analogies that you read in John chapter 4, that's like close to your heart.
Yeah,
right?
I guess I take that in
you're
sense, right?
You're the actual expert that we can talk to about.
Very cool.
Yeah. Okay, well, great. Well, thanks, guys, for being here. We're excited to jump into this topic. The premise of our discussion today is the Kennedy versus Bremerton School District decision. And this was primarily authored by Justice Gorsuch. The question before the court was that there was a football coach who had established a practice of praying at midfield at the conclusion of games. Now, he had done some, I guess, prayers before the games, that kind of thing. The school district had asked him to cease those activities. They were worried about separation of church and state, if the Establishment Clause issue. He said, fine, I'll comply with that. But once the game was over, he would go to midfield and silently pray. And students would then come to join him. The school district came back to him 3 times in October 2015. They cite as specific occurrences for dismissing him because he was still praying, and they felt that this was somehow an intrusive establishment of religion by a government entity. Since he's a high school football coach, he's paid by the local government, and therefore there's this implicit message that's being put out there by him praying in the middle of a football field right after a game that would kind of compel kids, or at least make them feel uncomfortable if they didn't join in, or things of that nature. That was the argument that the defendants brought before the court. So he's the plaintiff. He's Coach Kennedy is the plaintiff, saying this was an unconstitutional infringement on, number one, my free exercise of faith, because I'm freely exercising my faith to pray. This is what Christians do, is we pray, we thank God for a safe game, things like that. Also, it's an infringement upon my free speech, because prayer is a form of speech and a form of public communication. So he's the plaintiff saying, you've discharged me illegally. And they had to defend their decision. The Ninth Court sided with the school district, appealed to the Supreme Court, who, in a 6-3 decision, overturned the Ninth. But what do we make about this? This kind of charge about can't you keep your religion to yourself is one that circulates quite a bit. Was there an inherent coercion, as one LA Times reporter put, that by praying and being an authority figure as a coach, well, gee, the players want to get play time. They're going to go over there, even if they don't like to pray, just to be seen by the coach and to be part of the in crowd. Is there an inherent coercion for students to join in on this? Is this somehow something that's problematic? So this is what we want to talk about. And then more broadly, what is the role of faith in the public square? Do crosses on the top of hills that are owned by government entities constitute an establishment of religion? Nativity sets that you see, for example, in city council front lawns, things like that. There's been all kinds of questions that have gone on. This is a topic that's been batted around many times. So I think we have to separate this out, if I'm thinking about it, into 3 questions. First of all, there's governmental expressions of faith. So those can include praying before a city council meeting, or praying before the opening of Congress, for example. The fact that the 10 Commandments are on the outside of the Supreme Court hall itself, crosses and things like that are owned by government entities. There's individuals within government who are praying and exercising their rights. Be that putting a Bible at your desk at work, or something like that as well. And then there's just individual people who show public expressions of faith that others would simply find it uncomfortable to see. How do we understand each of these ideas? Where's the line to be drawn? And does separation of church and state apply? How does it apply? Does it make any sense at all? How do we process all of these things? A lot of questions, because I think there's a lot of Christians out there who are going like, I just want to do what I do. I want to love my God. I want to be part of my faith. I want it to just, be who I am. What's your take on some of these issues, and where are the problem areas in our society? Where are the potential advantages? How do we as Christians, and Christianity is by its definition an evangelical faith. It is a faith of evangelism, of proselytization. That's part and parcel of the command that Jesus gives us in Matthew 28. How does that fit into this whole question as well? What do you guys think? What's the rub here?
That's big.
There's a lot of pieces to this.
Yeah.
So should faith be private in government settings?
On an individual basis, no. Because it's you mentioned separation of church and state. That's not even a thing. It's the establishment clause is what it is, right? Government shall not establish a religion. The state shall not, establish a religion like this is our religion. We're not a theocracy.
Right.
We are a democratic republic. So.
There was the Church of England. There was the Church of Germany. I mean, I have to comment. One of the interesting things that came out of Protestantism, and Martin Luther and then those who followed, were concerned about the abuses of the papacy. That the papacy was, really, it was the Pope who was controlling the Holy Roman Emperor. So the emperor would do whatever the Pope would want, that the Pope was the one who had all the political power. And that concerned them. You got the indulgences and all of these other issues as well. But what I found fascinating is once the Protestant Reformation kicked in and many people pulled away from Roman Catholicism, they turned right around and they created these state churches. So you have the Church of England, for example, right, where King Henry becomes the defender of the faith, and the Church of Geneva, and you have it was fascinating that they turned around and made the very same mistake of mixing politics and religion that it seemed that they were criticizing in the papacy.
Yeah. There's a dangerous thing is you're not an American Christian, you're a Christian American.
Yeah.
Right? So on an individual basis, I think we employ what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether you eat, drink, whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. The purpose of your life should be to increase the glory of God, to enjoy Him. It's Christian hedonism. Being completely satisfied in Christ at the increase of His glory.
Yes. Don't know if I would define it as hedonism because it seems to be an unconstrained ideology.
It's the idea.
Yeah. But I understand what you're trying to say.
It's Christian hedonism. It flips on its head what self-satisfaction really should be. You should be completely satisfied in all that God is. Anyway, it's maybe a poor term, but so in that you should live your life that permeates God's glory, that permeates the fact that you are Christ-like. You are a little Christ, So if that's praying before a meal, if that's praying after a game, if that's praying before a session, if that's putting a Bible on your desk, you should absolutely be doing all those things as the Lord leads. Now, the big thing with this was they were claiming that he was kind of putting the government stamp of approval on the act because it was done.
Kind of compelling others to join into a religious exercise that they would have A, possibly not done, or B, felt uncomfortable doing, but felt compelled to do anyway.
Yeah. So, but in that regard, as a Christian, as an individual person that is a Christ follower, everything that you do should set you apart from the world. As far as what the government's doing, as far as how this fits into the establishment clause, I don't see how praying on a field after a game, when literally anybody could go out and pray on that field after that game. We might get into that a little bit too, what the Christian's opinion of that should be. How that is establishing an order or religion, that seems pretty flimsy to me. It seems like this is an individual exercising his religious freedom and his freedom of speech to go down there. So I don't know that I answered your question, but yes, on an individual basis, yes, do it. On a governmental agency basis, saying we are all going to pray to Jesus Christ or pray to God through Jesus Christ before we open our session. Okay, maybe there's something to be said about that.
Yes, right. But Congress does offer a prayer prior to each session opening, but they would argue that they don't establish religion because they invite individuals from, and matter of fact, there was a case in Connecticut just a couple of years ago where this was true as well, where there was the opportunity for any pastor, imam, religious leader to sign up in order to lead those cases. And so therefore it's not an establishment of religion if it's open to the general public, and any person of religious faith can choose to come in and
clarify this for me. So is the establishment clause, was it not the spirit of that was to prevent, so the founders didn't want, well, first off, the grounding of our American culture and just America as a whole was grounded on biblical principles, right?
it was.
But it wasn't particular to a certain denomination,
Right,
right?
yeah.
So it wasn't related to Baptists. It wasn't
Right.
Congregationalists. versus-
The idea of non-compelled faith, which again has been inimical in Christianity, was one of the five unique aspects of the founding, and it's actually uniquely Christian, that you don't compel someone to become Christian, that if that individual wants to be secular or pagan or whatever, you leave that to them. That's the question of their standing before God. You do the best you can to offer evidence, arguments, reasons that they should hold
Wasn't
to the
the
Christian
intent
faith.
at that
But the
time-
idea is that there needs to be grace in exercise, because we think that basically it's God's problem ultimately, right? That individual either converts or not, or doesn't convert, and therefore there should not be an overarching federal level religious entity.
assignment, right?
Yes.
So the intent was not to us. It was protecting religion from government influence, right? Not the other way around.
Correct.
Not protecting government from religious influence.
Right, because that's where the phrase separation of church and state comes from. The Danbury Baptist Church, who were the minority,
Right.
Yeah.
wrote to Thomas Jefferson in 1802.
And it was a letter. It wasn't
It
policy.
was a letter.
Yeah.
And he offered them assurances that the state won't come in, because Baptists were by far the minority. Again, most of the founders came from England, which means that they were Anglican. Episcopalian is the U.S. version of that nowadays, but Church of England was their primary, and so you were the dominant. And in those days, there was a lot of bigotry between the denominations. If if you were an Anglican, you didn't shop at a Baptist store, and vice versa. People would be shunned and things like that. It was dumb. It was stupid. It's one of the reasons why Joseph Smith and Mormonism grew up, because he said, which religion should I join? And supposedly the answer came back, none of them. They're all an abomination. So when Christians get this wrong, things like cults come out of it.
When the founders created this whole system through the Constitution, there, in my mind, the way I imagine it, and I don't know if it happened this way or not, but it seems as though they were working with an existing worldview as, I'll call it like a broad view of Christianity.
Right.
And then the Constitution was kind of formed around that broad view of Christianity. And so any system that is compatible with the Constitution is kind of acceptable? Would
No, I would say it's even broader than that. So the foundational ideas of the United States, the why, there's the why and there's the how. The Constitution is the how. The Constitution is the mechanics. Here's how the business is going to be run. We're going to have three different branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial.
Right.
Each one will be balanced in power. That was another aspect of Christianity that's unique to the United States, is we can't trust anybody because all men are sinful.
Right.
So everybody has to have checks and balances against
Correct.
it. But that's the how, and that's why the Constitution doesn't go into a lot of discussion about God. The why is the Declaration. So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equally and endowed by their Creator. So that's where the and when it becomes necessary for one man to break the bonds, right, they go on and they start listing their grievances against King George as part of that. So that's the why, and they root that in the idea of God. However, that doesn't mean that if someone is a Muslim, he doesn't have a recognized right to take advantage of the same aspects of the American experience as a Christian.
So if, not pointing at Muslims, but let's say a worldview exists that is unconstitutional, and they're trying to practice that worldview.
Yeah, I mean, you had deists.
Is it approved?
Yeah, well, it's not. It's allowed. The Constitution allows those who would hold to Buddhist Jainism, whatever.
As long as its principles are consistent with constitutional values. Is that right?
Well, when you say constitutional values, I mean, what do you mean by that?
I mean, we have laws.
So yeah, you can't. So let's take
inalienable rights that exist.
Santeria. You can't perform animal sacrifices anywhere, or you can't marry multiple wives.
Right.
That. So there are certain aspects that the United States would say there are certain laws that supersede certain religious principles. However, other cases like the peyote case in California, which marijuana was illegal at the time, but they said this is part of our religious practice, that was considered an exception to the rule, because what happens is you have a balance. And all of this came about in a Supreme Court case that was argued, and it was the Lemon case, that was 1971. And the Lemon case started talking about what is acceptable religious practice for government, what consists establishment of religion and what doesn't. They gave you a 3-part test. The United States can help with religious activities, but only if the main reason they're helping is for a secular reason. That was the first one. Second, the government must remain neutral about religion. The government can't advocate for any one religion, and they can't punish people for practicing or not practicing religious beliefs. And then lastly, there must be no what they call excessive entanglement as the government makes these decisions. In other words, they can't get so entrenched into the specifics of one faith that even though they're not practicing their faith, it's almost as if they're giving them tax-free status, but nobody else, or something like that. They're de facto helping one guy out.
Doesn't that lean or default towards a secular system then? It almost seems like we view secularism as a neutral position.
Right, and that's part of the problem. I think that's part of the central question. Can we actually? Is there such a thing as neutrality writ large? And actually, this Kennedy case starts to point to the Lemon Law as saying, there's something hopelessly confused about this, because how do you define what's neutral?
No, I mean, secularism requires that you kind of sever your religious beliefs. So in essence, by definition, you're dividing yourself and not being able to practice or be who you are from a religious standpoint.
Right.
So if I'm forced to promote a secular belief system in a political environment or work environment or whatever environment, then that is, in essence, it's infringing on my religious rights to
free exercise.
So you can't get away from it.
And you see this playing out probably the most prevalently in public school systems, right?
Yes.
And that's where the worry comes from. Because anywhere else, I really don't have much of a worry because we're all adults here. We can, we can have conversations.
Well, we had a case just recently in our hometown here where there's a cross on top of Mount Rubidoux, and an atheist filed before the American Civil Liberties Union that the cross needed to be taken down because every day he wakes up and he looks up at that cross, knowing that it's sitting on city property, and saying, that's offensive to me as an atheist.
It's weird to be offended by something you don't even believe in. Right?
Well,
if you don't believe in something, you simply move on and don't worry about it, right? If you don't believe that there was a Christ, if you don't believe that God created everything, if you don't believe any of that has any ramifications or bearing on your life, what does it matter what sits on top of that thing?
Well, I mean, it's, to me, I have, first of all, I strain at the credulity of the idea that this is the thing that racks his brain.
Sure, yeah.
You know, I mean, in one sense, I can understand that there may be a guilt associated. I think the Hound of Heaven sometimes pokes at people, especially those who are atheists, and it does make them feel uncomfortable because they know that they're, it's kind of an internal guilt thing. It's not the fact that the symbol in and of itself is offensive.
Right.
Although the cross can be considered offensive, right? Stumbling block.
Even in early Christianity,
Yes.
I mean, it wasn't a symbol of Christianity. It was the fish that was symbol of Christianity.
Right.
You know?
Because people, it would be like wearing a little electric chair.
Right, yeah, it didn't make any sense. It's like, that's where they murdered Jesus.
The worst of the worst. Yeah. The cross was just, but all that is to say is, it becomes, it bothers me that they would say that. But to your question, and this is something that I struggle with because I think we've bought into the idea. I think most of society has assumed that being secular means being at zero, being at neutral. And why do you say
of itself?
Why do you say that that's not true?
Because in order to be secular, you have to give up your religious views, regardless of what it is. To be neutral, quote unquote, already, let's say you have an option, right? You either believe in God, or God either exists or he doesn't exist, right?
Yes.
So of the two, the secular position is you can't talk about God, so therefore he doesn't exist. You're taking a position.
Mm-hmm.
You're not saying, hey, it's either one or the other. You're saying, hey, the secular position is you can't talk about God.
Right.
So you're inferring that God doesn't exist. It's an implied position.
Or you're acting like he's not there and you must ignore him.
Right.
Sure. It's like flirting with a girl at your work, and she says, well, let's just pretend you're not married for a moment, and then it becoming okay.
Yeah.
Right? It's not okay because I am tied to this woman, and there are going to be ramifications of me pretending that this is not okay, pretending that this does not exist.
It changes the way you behave.
Yeah.
It changes whether you even approach that
Absolutely.
individual. It changes how you think about further interactions.
Yeah. It's
I think this is part of the reason why it confuses me a little bit. The whole separation from church and state concept is, I feel like we're still infantile culturally regarding this, because we're so sensitive to these issues and these concerns, where I feel like in other cultures, the freedom and the ability to converse and to talk and to have differences of opinion are there, and you can talk about it and not be offended by it so much, and be like, hey, I get it. I disagree with you. I think you're wrong, but and I've got my reasons for why I disagree and think you're wrong, and you have your reasons why you disagree and think I'm wrong. And that's okay at the end of the day. I mean, you walk away and hopefully you've grown a little bit by knowing more about them, and they've grown a little bit by knowing more about you. We live in a pluralistic society, and you would think that our skin would be a little thicker, but the opposite is happening. By us applying this separation from church and state, we're becoming so sensitive for the minutia that we no longer have the ability to utilize our minds and say, hey, I can address your worldview, I can discuss it, I can run it through hash it out, as it were.
Yeah.
But you don't have that opportunity anymore. Now you're forced to isolate and separate and divide the body at the American body, and say, well, you can't talk about these issues.
Right.
I mean, like the church I go to, my pastor's very involved in politics, and I have friends who are like, yeah, I can't go to your church because, you know, it's too political. And part of me is like, well, oh, okay, but I mean, how do you sever religion from politics?
Politics is just the word that means how we relate to the public.
Right.
That's all it is. We've turned it into something else, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can't sever it.
There
I mean, if
those-
politics regulates and creates policy on how our behavior is, and so does religion, then you can't sever the two.
So one person has supposedly, tried to understand politics by breaking the word up. Poly meaning,
Yes.
of course,
Many.
and ticks
Yeah.
meaning blood-sucking leeches.
Yeah, that's Robin Williams.
So,
That was his joke.
yeah. So, but
There's
more than that. Yeah.
There's truth to that.
But so Muslim individuals. So you go to Speaker's Corner in London, and Jay Smith and others who have engaged with Muslims will tell you this makes no sense to most people because religion is so central to their lives, and it informs them, as we say, about their life choices and how they react and how they interpret the world. Right? Matter of fact, your faith is the foundation of your worldview, how you understand and interpret the ways of life. And for them, they say, oh, of course we talk about these things because these are important things. These are how we deal with the issues of life. If you're not talking about them, then maybe you don't care about them too much. And what this exclusive secularity does is it actually, it curbs your faith. It actually stifles it and allows it to shrink as opposed to grow.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, I think earlier on, is it to protect the government from religion or religion from government?
Right.
When two things can't coexist, one thing must reign supreme.
Right.
If two things can't coexist, so instead of erring on the side of what we've always erred on the side of, that God exists and we flow all of our, like you mentioned, there's the Ten Commandments are on,
Right. The Supreme Court.
and people are so angry about the Ten Commandments. I'm like, do you disagree that lying is wrong? Do you disagree that murder is wrong? Do you disagree that adultery is wrong? Do you disagree that coveting is wrong? No, nobody cares about that. What they do care about is, I am the Lord your God.
Yeah.
No other gods before me.
Right.
You know, remember the Sabbath day and to keep it set apart holy. Those are the things that they care about. But those are the things at which virtue and law flows.
And it is the tradition from which we get our modern society. It is not just out of so.
And that's
You get the opposite. Let's take the Ohio case where they wanted to put the Church of Satan wanted to put a statue of Baphomet. Right? Okay, you've got a Christian cross over here. I want to put a statue of Baphomet in an Ohio park. If you're allowing all religions, then you should be allowing us as well. Or
as if it's a zero-sum game.
as the defendants in the Bremerton case, the Kennedy versus Bremerton School District case argued, how would you feel if it was a Muslim who rolled out his prayer shawl at the 50-yard line and wanted to start praying to Allah at that time? Does that change the argument?
I think that's where that comment earlier that I mentioned about it being consistent with the Constitution, does it infringe on any of those rights? So like if this individual is praying to Allah, does it counter any of the Constitution? It almost seems like if it doesn't counter the constitutional rights, then...
And this
Is it really
sometimes this is offered as a gotcha moment when I think most Christians would say, go for it. If you want to pray, pray.
But I think a lot would say that, but not practice that.
Yeah. Some people
think
maybe.
many Christians would have a problem with it.
I think you're right. Really,
probably speak louder against it than some of the secular people, because we got a lot of Karens, and I'm sorry if your name's Karen, man. You have had a rough couple of years,
right?
But I think people. To your point too, does it go against the Constitution? I think the Constitution is there to protect individual freedom and liberty and rights. So really, what we should be asking is, does this person's act infringe upon your individual right
Yeah.
to act, right? So does him praying at the 50-yard line infringe upon and inhibit you from doing the same if you were to want to do that? The answer is no.
Right.
It doesn't. It's really how we interact with each other, and we've made it how we interact with the government.
So what Gorsuch wrote in his ruling was that once a game is over, many coaches do many things that are completely personal and independent. They can get on the phone. If you're on the clock, you're not allowed to just call your family and chat. But they would do that, or they take family pictures. Once the game is over, the governmental authority and the governmental responsibility has been released, right? You're off the clock, basically, is what they're saying, more or less. And so if it's a post-game prayer, then he's exercising in his individual liberties the way anybody else talking to somebody on the phone, making a stock deal, whatever the case may be, are exercising their individual liberties at the same time, because that's the era, that's the time frame that we're discussing. And those were the 3 dates in question.
But let's take it back before the game. Is there a problem with him praying even before the game?
If he was leading students in prayer, they would have probably said yes, because he's leading the students in prayer. If it was student initiated, then no, because the students are allowed to freely exercise their rights. And this kind of school tension has gone on for quite some time. As an authority figure, if you're saying we are going to pray to God and I'm going to close it in Jesus' name, then they would argue, and again, they point to the Lemon test, that's excessively entangled. That it's not being neutral. It's actually propagating one form of faith above another.
Interesting.
Again, by being secular, you're still entangling a secular system.
Yes.
Right?
Well,
See, that's the problem with it.
That is a problem, because a lot of people might look at this and be like, man, why am I talking about this?
Right.
Why do I care what some guy I don't even live in his town does after a game? But what it shines a light on is which one of those 2 things reigns supreme.
Right.
Secularism reigns supreme. And so where is it also reigning supreme? I don't even care about sports. What about the classroom? What about being taught math? 2 + 2 can equal 5 now, things like that. What are kids being taught? What is rising to the top as the supreme thing to teach kids at the expense of the other things?
So let's tease this out in another direction. When the Rubidoux case was ongoing, they've since settled it, and the way they settled it was the city kind of took the easy way out. They had a private entity form a nonprofit corporation, and they sold Mount Rubidoux, the top portion of Mount Rubidoux, to that nonprofit corporation. So now the city doesn't own the cross, the nonprofit corporation does. They lease back to the city the rights for maintenance and things like that. So it was they kind of cheated. But when this was happening, I was on the radio with the lawyer from the ACLU who was going to bring the case. And I started talking to him. And he said, you can't do this. Because it's a government entity, and it's putting an article of faith up there, a symbol of faith, then it's like a constitution of endorsing that. And I asked him, well, let me ask you a question. Should governmental entities, isn't it equally as egregious for them to endorse sexual preferences?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He goes, what do you mean? I said, have you ever been to West Hollywood? They paint rainbow flags on the sidewalk as crosswalks.
Yes, the neighborhood.
Why is that? Why aren't you suing them? Why aren't you being consistent? If this is your perspective, if this is your guiding principle, why aren't you suing them? And he goes, well, I've never really been to West Hollywood. I said, well, it's there. What are you going to do about it? And right then, the radio host said, well, we're sorry. That's all the time we have for right now. So I got the last word. But this is something that I've thought about. currently in our society, there is an argument that specific aspects of who you are very important. How you identify, right? To use the terminology of the day, what gender you identify as, or what sexual orientation you feel. Those are supposedly fundamental aspects of who you are, right? They are fun, and therefore, not only should they not be castigated, but they should be celebrated. Again, this is July. We've just come out of June, which is another Pride Month, where everybody and their brother are tripping over each other to try and show how much they are not bigoted, and they are flying the rainbow flag, and et cetera, et cetera. Add to that the critical social justice aspects of biopic and intersectionality and all of the stuff that's going on there. But isn't your faith more central to who you are and how you understand the world than even your sexual identity? Why, and this comes back to kind of what we were discussing previously, why is sex the central thing that defines who we are as opposed to our faith? Because sex doesn't tell us all the things that we need to use to understand the world. It doesn't tell us what our origins are. Your sexual orientation, your sexual identity are silent about why man exists versus why he doesn't. They're silent about what our ultimate ends are. They're silent about specific moral questions like what is the proper way to treat a stranger? How should one society engage with another society? All the famous trolley car problems. You can't get that from sexual orientation or even critical social justice. It pushes itself as a worldview, but it's a deficient worldview. It's a faux worldview. It's like a movie set. You only see the front facades. There's nothing behind it. So although critical social justice preaches itself and acts like it's a worldview, it's really empty because it doesn't answer all the questions that worldview does. Religion fills in all of that. It's three-dimensional. It's not just the front face. That makes religion more central to your understanding of life than even your sexual orientation, your race, your sex, whatever the circle you want to talk about is. If that's true, then why is it okay for cities to promote those and not this? That's my question. And that's what we don't talk about. We don't think about. I think we have again, we're blinded by our hyper individualism that happens in our society, right? Everybody is all so worried about even offending somebody or possibly offending somebody, as opposed to speaking what's true. That's a problem. And everybody has to be an individual. You can't be the same as anybody else in any way. Although what's fascinating is everybody wants to be an individual exactly like all their friends.
Right.
But
it's definitely tribalism.
Yeah.
Or more than it is individual. It's tribalism masquerading as being unique.
But I have to be me. It's what I feel. You see, that's the language that we use.
Yeah, it's a new form of Gnosticism.
Yes.
It's I think Vodi Bakum, he calls kind of the social justice movement, at the root of it, there's a ethnic Gnosticism that only you in your group can understand the plight of your group.
Right.
And no one else could ever understand it. And I have a special knowledge of it that I can never share with you. Same thing happens with it's kind of a sexual Gnosticism. Once you identify as non-binary, you've moved your way up on the intersectionality
that's right.
grid, pyramid, just by way of speaking it into existence, right? You see this, Demi Lovato comes out and in a tear-filled video shared by millions, celebrated by millions, and all at once she's being celebrated and oppressed And it just makes no sense, because now she's non-binary. She's not coming out as gay. She's just coming out as like, I'm neither or. It's very Gnostic.
Yeah.
And only I can understand this because I have this special knowledge. I've been enlightened to this idea and so in a sense, like you said, it is a religion in the sense that it's a Gnostic religion. And so you can...
Definitely,
but the problem
is the physical from the emotional and ethereal.
It becomes spiritual, but the problem is it's not an established religion, right? So how do you can't put a name and a face and an establishment to it, because it's, like you said, hyper individual.
Well, it's considered a secular position,
Yeah.
Which it is not, because again, faiths have always understood sexuality as part, and simply because sexuality is tied to the
I wonder
procreative
if
process.
that's why we've gone this direction and kind of erred in that way, is because we've promoted secularism for so long. Secularism, by nature, excludes the ability to have boundaries, right? So if you have a religious system that
Not necessarily. I mean, there have been societies who have boundaries, but it's argument on box. Right.
To be neutral is to eliminate the boundary, right? Am I thinking that right?
And yeah, so I guess I'm asking what kind of boundaries you're talking about, because there are certain moral boundaries that even secular societies would.
Yeah, but what prevents them from being able to go beyond those moral boundaries?
If the society itself,
if it's secular by nature, it has to be neutral. It can't say yay or nay on it, right?
it can say this is what we agree. So you get either utilitarianism that starts to flow out of that, or because utilitarianism could offer a secular engagement, which they say the greatest good for the greatest number, and that's why a lot of secular guys would.
It seems to me that by adopting a secular system, you're removing, and I might be imagining this wrong, but you're removing those boundaries, and you're saying, hey, these established religions that come in, like let's say Christianity, you have these boundaries that are related to your sexuality, but secularism says you're not allowed to promote your religious views on sexuality. So therefore,
it assumes a
there's
privacy
an
and a personal. It assumes religion is more opinion than, or not opinion, I shouldn't say. It assumes preference. It assumes religion is more based on preference than a factual understanding.
But by default, you're promoting a certain view by saying, we can't listen to your view,
right?
Because your view is religious by nature.
Well, and that's see, but that's a religious claim.
No, I agree, but because we've defaulted to this pseudo-secular system, they're by nature saying we have no limitation. We're not limited. Our view of sexuality is not limited like your view. We're staying neutral, but because we're staying quote-unquote neutral, that means that it's boundless. We have to offer an open or a...
But if you fly the pride flag, that's no longer being neutral. That's advocating.
You're wrong.
If carrying their argument, if a football coach praying silently at the field is inherent coercion because he's a government representative, then flying the pride flag at the government capitol and having the government sanction Pride Month in writ is explicit coercion. It's not inherent, it's explicit.
Yeah.
So it can't...
There's a trick being played in our society, and it goes back, I think it's Thomas Sowell said, the problem is we erased history class and instilled social studies. There's a great, I know we're kind of not going into the social justice realm here, but there's a great... you ever seen Jurassic Park 2?
Oh, yeah.
Lost World Jurassic Park. Ian Malcolm goes to John Hammond, and he's in bed and he's sick, and he's trying to convince Ian Malcolm to go back to the island. It's a different island this time. He's like, you got to go back to this dino island. We need to protect these animals, and so I'm sending a crew. And Ian Malcolm goes, John Hammond says, and don't worry, I'm not making all the same mistakes again. And he goes, no, you're making all new ones. And so we've studied our social history through the lens of we cannot make these same mistakes again. And instead of moving on and joining hands and saying, yes, we're all together on this, we're going to move forward, we've raised a generation to now long and look for what is the other social injustice that's happening in our time beyond race.
Right.
Because we've had the civil rights movement, and now it's kind of doubled back to race. Right. But for the longest time, it's been now what is another immutable characteristic? You have race, you have sexuality, which is come through the sexual revolution, obviously.
So there's a couple of points I wanted to bring up about this. First of all, when you take faith out of people's lives as the central focus, as Dominic says, you lose an objective moral criterion, an objective set of virtues, right? You don't have that agreed upon set of objective virtues anymore. So people start to flounder and they start to feel like they can't be virtuous, but they want to be virtuous. There's something in us that wants to be virtuous, that wants to do the good, right? God has instilled in each one of us. Even Romans 1 says that, that there's or Romans 2, there's a law that, written on our hearts, and the Romans become a law unto themselves and things of that nature. But because we're sinful and we're corrupted, we can't seem to find the right focus of that. So when there's a gap there, they try to cling on to whatever they can to become virtuous. And the term you're talking about is what they call Selma envy.
Yes.
So Selma envy is the March on Selma. Martin Luther King, civil rights movement in the 1960s was held up for many years, the high water mark of, he was passive resistance, right? Peaceful. So Gandhi is another example of this, but it's not as resonant with young Americans. Martin Luther King in the civil rights struggle is more prevalent in their minds. So they want to be that. They want to, and they will say things, I would never own a slave. I would have never I would have been marching alongside Martin Luther King.
Probably not true.
That's probably not, if they actually saw what
and it's not,
hoses were actually turned on them. There's a whole lot of people who's, but
and it's not true because of how many people, when we talked about this last time, are so angry over Roe v. Wade.
Yes, exactly.
Right? That's the blind spot we have today that we're going to look back on 50 years from now and go, I can't believe we allowed.
I'm telling you right now, 50 years from now, at least, definitely, the people are going to look back at what we've done with the transgender, and they're going to say, how could these people be so cannibalistic in destroying how can they be so monstrous in chopping off body parts and destroying people's lives and causing forced sterilization and experimenting on children. It's going to be.
I don't want to promote another entity, but if you haven't watched What is a Woman
by Matt Walsh, I've not seen yet. I've seen clips, but I know
I'm not allowed to talk about that in the public square because I'll get in trouble. But it is an excellent documentary.
So one of the ways I deal with it, and again we go back to language. Language is the control of it, and see, this is where Christians really need to rethink how they use language, I think, because we continue to. So, for example, I am a homosexual. Nobody actually says that. They'll say I am gay. Prior to that, you would say homosexuality. Believe it or not, homosexuality is considered offensive now, even though it's a neutral clinical term. It's now no longer neutral. But prior to the 1880s, that idea, no, you had certain actions that you did, you had certain predilections that you liked, but that's not who you were. You never defined yourself that way. So I similarly have a problem with the word gender. Okay, people are not gendered. French nouns are gendered. French nouns are male or female. People are sexed.
Right.
And that's a big. Now, gender can be understood as preference, or an action maybe, or an attitude may be gendered. That's a very masculine approach. You can say that, right? What all that says is that runs typical to the male psyche or male mindset. But a person himself or herself isn't gendered. You are a masculine, you are a feminine. No, you're a feminine female, right? So your attitudes are more feminine, or you're a masculinized female. But what does it mean to be a female gender? Does that mean that you have to wear dresses? Does that mean that you can't become an astronaut? Everybody would reject that. Gender doesn't tell you anything specific about who you are. It may tell you about actions that you like. So people aren't gendered, people are sexed. They're either male or female. Their actions, their preferences may hold some gender ideology, but I never say that people are gendered. What gender are you? I even, the gender reveal party. Talking to somebody about this last night. It's like, no, it's not a gender reveal party. It's what sex is the baby. And we've got it, and they're changing the forms. Why are they changing the forms? Because they know that gender is a much looser term, and it can apply to different biologies if they so desire. And so it's the camel's nose under the tent, and we just have to be careful in how we express those kinds of things.
There are consequences of the terminology we use, and oftentimes, unfortunately, we don't scrutinize the terminology we use, so we just kind of capitulate and take on whatever is being stated. So if somebody approaches me and says, I'm a he, her, and I'm like, well, yeah, right. And so what do you want me to say or do about it? So that I'm not gonna capitulate and say I'm gonna just call you whatever you want me to call you, because you associate yourself with a certain gender when physically you are something totally different.
Well, and it leads to more, right?
Yeah.
It leads to sex, because if I were to say I'm a woman now, I'm a she, her, and everybody affirms me in that, because you can be whatever you want. I'll call you whatever I want to call you. Right. Great. So I'm gonna go get surgery now, and I'm gonna change my. You can't really change your sex, but I'm gonna change my appearance and my sex.
Change your body to match.
Change my body to match my feelings. Well, now that has physical ramifications,
right?
And so you might care about that. Or if you don't, you're an individual, that's fine.
More importantly, you have individuals who are being placed in women's detention facilities.
Sure, yeah.
Who are then turning around and raping the female.
That's happening, yeah.
And they're impregnating them.
Well, and a lot of people might say, well, that's a fringe an account. And I'm like, one account is too many accounts. So anyway, but so now, like you mentioned, neutrality. Neutrality is a holding chamber. It is not where you live. You can't live in neutrality. The purpose of neutrality is to get to the truth, right?
Yes.
If I'm neutral on a subject, I'm ready to move in the right direction. Right. But what our culture wants us to do is live in the holding chamber of neutrality and say, whatever, I'm just going to be here. And when you do that, truth is objective. It's complete chaos. It's men or women or 5 other genders, whatever they choose to be. And now, it's insane, but in this documentary, it's like, we're noticing that even babies are expressing their gender before they can speak. And I'm like, dude, you're nuts.
No, they're not, yeah.
And so now you're not only you're asking me to call you what you want me to call you, you're asking me to stay and project it upon a child, which is not okay. And then even more so, rejecting it into the ideology of the culture that's going to affect my child, which is a dangerous thing. And so, you need to be secular or have a belief system. You can't live in neutrality. I think that's great.
G.K. Chesterton made a famous statement where he says, an open mind should be like an open mouth. You keep it open long enough to close it again on something.
That's great.
And it's you just don't leave it open the whole time because your brains will fall out. So that's part of the problem. Now, given, and here's the thing with the pronouns. This is another thing we talked about. What are your pronouns? Well, my pronouns are, you hear these phrases, and I stop people right there. I say, wait a minute. What do you mean, your pronouns? What makes them yours? They're not your pronouns. Language doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Language, by its definition, is a mutually agreed form of symbolism. We have a word that stands for something that at least two people have to agree upon. More generally, language is what we agreed upon broadly, right? So, and it changes. I give you that the term gay today does not normally invoke the idea of happiness, right? Oh, it was a gay play. If you say it was a gay play today, nobody's going to say, oh, it was just a whimsical, happy, breezy kind of. That's not what they're going to. It can still mean that if you qualify it, but you have to qualify it because language changes.
Yeah.
But language is an agreed upon common reference. It's something that all of us share in. You don't get to change what pronouns mean. Pronouns are part of language. You can change what your name is. Your name is personal. So if you want to go by Christine instead of Sam, right? Johnny Cash sung about a boy named Sue. Yeah.
Well, my mom's name is Jody. That was a boy name for the longest time, and now it's a girl name.
Kelly, that kind of. Yeah, but you don't get to say pronouns mean whatever I want them to mean, because that becomes chaos. Now they, them is plural. It's always been plural. And when you just see something written in the paper about they or them, you're going to assume that there's more than one individual in play. And so I say, why do you think you get to change pronouns? There's no right for you to even assume that pronouns are something that are in play.
And then to force that on someone else to kind of go with the game that you're playing.
Saying, so it's the same thing as secularism. You have to buy into my system because I say what I feel.
And this is full circle, because why should we care about a football coach that gets in trouble for praying after a game when it's like such a fringe little thing? Because there's something deeper at play.
There's something deeper at play. And that is who he is. That's how he identifies.
Yeah. Or he, she, whatever. But because behind those classroom doors, how are you able to teach English now? Right?
It's part of the problem. It's what are you
grammar even a thing anymore?
Well, I mean, if you've been on Facebook, that's not. It hasn't been a thing for the last 10 years.
Obviously, and everybody's talked about the Orwellian shift that's been going on because everybody now is trying to control the language, since that's where the battlefield started. We got some easy gains, and now it becomes, just rhetoric back and forth, which is much more difficult to people who actually want to get to truth. And you've got to then navigate that minefield on top of everything else. Now, in all of this, we've done some complaining. How do we then put this in a way where maybe those who are secular, friends, family, maybe those who have some passionate political understandings, because they are tying this to ideas of virtue, so you'll have critical social justice, and people truly believe that they're righteous in what they are doing. I mean, that's how they understand it.
Sure.
So how do we communicate this before we close? How do we get this message out that secularism actually isn't neutral, that faith, and the way I've alluded before is, if you think your sexual identity or your sexual orientation is one of the central aspects of who you are and is therefore sacred, then the sacred is sacred. Yeah. It's more sacred. If your race, and realize that a lot of people misconstrue race and heritage, and this is especially it's understood, especially within the African American community, because heritage is much harder to trace.
Yeah, it is.
And it's because of the horrific aspects of antebellum slavery. What happened there, that they lost individuation. You can't tell whether you're Swahili or Nigerian or what have you, whatever the background is. It's hard, impossible really, for most African American people to trace their lineage. But I think we would agree that there's a big distinction between race and heritage, and it's heritage that makes the big difference, right?
It is.
So for you, it's those meals that your parents cooked from the homeland that bring back those memories. The certain celebrations for different holidays, the language that we use. All of these things are family and heritage, and that is a sacred part of who you are.
Absolutely.
It's not the fact that your skin is this tint of white and it matches that guy's tint of white. That's superficial. And again, up until very, very recently, we understood that skin tone, right? Even Martin Luther King, content of your character rather than the color of your skin.
Yeah. I love it. You said heritage. It is getting lost, and that's a tragedy.
Yeah.
It's funny. This is a funny story. So, have you done 23andMe or like Ancestry.com? You guys tried doing that?
I know where my lineage comes from because my great grandfather came from Sicily. At least on that side, we've had that understanding for quite some time.
So if you are strong in that, don't do 23andMe.
It'll blow you up.
This is funny. So there's so many stories, but so my wife, her mom's side of the family is Puerto Rican, and she grew up in the Puerto Rican heritage on her mom's side of the family, eating Puerto Rican food, going to Puerto Rican weddings, it's like, hey, come over for dinner at 5. That means you're going to be there till 2 a.m. and we're not going to start cooking till 7. And it's just one of those, there was a heritage there. There was a community in which she was a part of there. And her uncle, who is very proud of his Puerto Rican heritage, is always saying, hey, you gotta maintain that. You gotta, teach it to your kids. And he's very, we took a trip back to the Bronx to see where her mom grew up and all these different things. And
not to Puerto Rico.
Not to Puerto Rico. Well, because that's where they she was not a first generation Puerto Rican.
It's like kind of like Marty Goetz's joke. We went to the whole
yes, yeah.
New York City.
New York City, yeah, exactly. So we went back there and to visit and see all these things, and then she gets a call from her uncle, and he is just distraught because he did a DNA test, and he is only 1% Puerto Rican. Yet, it was such a part of his identity and his heritage. Let it remain that part of who cares what you are in your DNA? And so then my wife says, well, I'm going to do it too. She is 0% Puerto Rican, but guess what? She's 30% Jewish. She has no ties to her Jewish heritage because no one in her family, nobody around. She has big ties to the Puerto Rican side and the Irish side, but she's just as much Jewish as she is Irish and 0% Puerto Rican. And so, that I can't stress that enough. And that doesn't exist anywhere other than where we live.
And it's the difference between where you come from and your family. My guess would be that it was either a Castilian family, or maybe it was Spanish Jews who were fleeing the Inquisition, who settled in Puerto Rico, and maybe that's who knows? Who knows? But that doesn't make you not Puerto Rican any more than Dom. Your parents are both from Portugal. You're still an American.
Right.
Yeah, there's no DNA test that'll say, are you American?
Right.
And a matter of fact, that's the main thing. If you go to Denmark, okay, I have more in common with a black American in Denmark than I would with a white Dane.
Sure.
And everybody in Europe, you're an American. You think like an American. You do American stuff. That's what they think about first. So it's your heritage, it's your culture, it's your upbringing. Those are the things that bond us. And really, that's what Christianity tells us, right? When you become part of the bodyhood of Christ, you are bonded closer than a brother. That Christian bond is probably the tightest bond we have. It supersedes race, it supersedes culture, other cultures, and it supersedes even familial ties. right?
That's Ephesians, right?
Oh,
You've
Jesus,
broken
leave
down
your-
the barrier wall.
Leave your father and mother.
You're a new creation in Christ. All things have passed away.
So
You have
so
a new
that's
identity.
part of what we need. So if that is true, then certainly Christianity is the most central aspect of who you are. And it can't be abandoned to neutrality, because it would be like saying, stop being black. Could you imagine? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, it all goes back to what you were bringing up earlier. I mean, what started this whole conversation was, whether or not we can continue to live and practice freely that way. Like the gentleman, the coach who was out there in the field, being who he is, that it's just sad to see that we've devolved so far to where we're so sensitive that we can't hash these things out. And by doing so, I feel like a lot of people have bought into lies that are taking them in destructive paths, both physically, psychologically, and emotionally. And we can't disagree with them, because if you do, then you're hateful.
Well, isn't it interesting at the exact same time that we're seeing this increase in what they call the awakening, right? the increase at the same time that supposedly social justice is coming to the fore and people are becoming more enlightened. It's the very same time you're seeing depression on the rise, suicide on the rise, despondency, hopelessness, the younger generation languishing. Maybe the truth is something different. Maybe the truth needs to be told, and that's why we're having a generation of individuals who are trying to live a secular life and finding out secularism is an empty promise. It's just a facade. The front of the house may look pretty. As you walk through the door, there's nothing to keep you warm at night and protect you from the environment. And I think that's where we are. Okay, guys. Well, thanks so much for this. This was a great conversation. Hey, what are your thoughts? What are your comments? Leave them in the comment section below. Let us know about other topics that you'd like us to discuss, and I'm sure that we'll come back to you next time.
I think maybe beard and mustache treatment.
Okay, yeah. Dom can talk to you about pomades.
Pomade and mustache wax.
Yeah, he's
we'll,
It's a good looking mustache.
we'll go into the details about
Yeah,
it.
there you go. All right. Until next time, this is Lenny Esposito for Come Reason Ministries. Goodbye. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.